Now, Larry, I think you've got some slides here to talk about the film look. Do you want to go through those?
Yeah, will you step them for me?
You bet.
Okay. Well, this is important because it's not just the frame rate. Those of you who shoot are attentive to all of these. These are individual handles you've got, all of which will contribute to the ultimate look of the picture. And the skilled cinematographers know the limitations of the subsampling of 24, and they know how to overcome that. And some of these other tools are a piece of that solution. The aperture, you might put an ND filter in, play with aperture, play with lighting, and now you can make trade-offs and bring in the shutter, and you can trade off strobing with blur, etc. So these are crafts that are well known. Next slide. And yeah, a point I wanted to add, 2 points really. Mark described the birth of 24. Where did it come from? The fact that it still exists today, 80 or 90 years later, is a colossal legacy. It's in our DNA. I think we all know the look after you've seen thousands of movies of what it looks like. It's familiar. I don't think it's the fact that it's bad or good. It's just tremendously familiar. And the genius of Hollywood, a unique American experience, by the way, who, when threatened by television, decided, well, if we can't beat them, we'll join them. We'll produce the television programming, and by the way, we'll do it on 35mm film. That's pretty unique in the world. So we've had 50 or 60 years of major television programs, commercials, and movies that end up on television being shot on 24-frame film. And when efforts were made 20 years ago by the SMPTE to try and get that frame rate up, and they had tremendous rationale behind the 30-frame decision at the time, a standard was produced. An awful lot of people spent about 5 years on that effort. And as soon as the standard was produced, it was totally ignored by the production industry. And of course, the other issue was raising film from 24 to 30 was going to cost a lot more. Film is expensive, and the more you consume, the more you spend. That was one of the big reasons it didn't. So it is here, whether we like it or not. It is familiar, and we've all had to work around it. Now, the way we work around it, the way the cinematographers work around it, be on the next slide, I think I start to talk about. Oh, yeah. Now, by the way, I always distinguish between strobing and juddering. When you play with the shutter and the little nice demonstration that Bruce gave of the ball, that when you start to see the ball jump like this, that's strobing. It's irregular, but there's a jerk in it. This judder comes when you then interfere with that to convert that 24 to 60 by the 3-2. Now that regular thing gets a kick in it because of the 2-3-2. That, I think, is probably the more accurate description of judder, but judder's generally used for the bang. Now, judder is something that our eyes and brains are very sensitive to, brightness. The big difference between the 14 foot Lamberts on a movie screen and the equivalent of 60 or 70 foot Lamberts that you can have on a television screen. Suddenly judder leaps out at you. And on a big HD screen, it can be pretty painful. So the way it's dealt with, next slide, I think it's the next slide.
I would add to that slide.
Sure, please, go ahead.
Screen size.
Screen size.
Or not screen size, but angle of view.
Angle of view, which is a screen size issue for a given,
yes.
Yeah, and the big HD screens are making it worse. So this is just a repeat of what I said earlier. The tools available to the cinematographer to deal with this judder and blur issue, depending on what's being shot, the type of scene, the nature of the motion, the speed of the motion, etc., are the aperture and the ND filter, if you like, in the imaging part, and then the electronic shutter and the frame rate choices. They're handles in our digital cameras today. And then, of course, the thing that Mark spoke about this morning, the all-important movement of the camera. And that's probably the biggest difference between television shooting and motion picture shooting. Next slide might start to show that. When you look at movie cameras, some very, very sophisticated equipment, support equipments were developed across the decades. And you look at them, they're large. And if you look at the bottom one here and here, you see those handles? That's the craftsmanship of the experienced cinematographer. It's a beautiful thing to watch, by the way. The way those cameras are moved, often on tracks, very often on tracks to get extremely smooth motion, and then watching the way he plays that handle to do the panning and tilting under very experienced knowledge of blur and judder. And that's hugely different than television, where we're swinging a camera around on a pedestal. And also, when there's fast action, next slide, depth of field. And that, of course, again, is playing with the larger image formats, playing with your lighting, playing with your shuttering, playing with your aperture in the lens. Focal length comes into it as well. That if you're following a fast action, especially something like this, you blur the background. You get the background out of focus. And now, when it blurs or judders, well, it's blurred, it doesn't trouble you. And your eye and brain attention is dragged into the foreground person, which is exactly what the director wants. So these are all skills that have been developed, and they've been pretty well perfected. And folks who are shooting for a movie will follow certain rules and use certain handles. They know that if it's being shot primarily for television, they'll make variants on those adjustments for anticipating the 3:2. These are skills, they have it in their brain when they do it. And that's really how 24p has been made to work, and work very well. We watch an awful lot of television programming. The engineer in us may be offended by the subsampling, but one can't argue that it works. It's here, and it's a big part of television. It's not going to go away in the near term. As we gravitate from film, and I think that is speeding up from motion picture film to digital. Once we do that and everybody's in digital, then I do believe we're going to start marching rapidly towards the sort of things that Doug was talking about. People will move to 48 frames, to 60 frames, to 72 frames. I do believe that. And I think the next debate you're going to hear in the industry is 4K, which we're hearing a lot about, at 24 frames, or as James Cameron says, no, 2K at 48 frames. And I think he's got a good point. That's going to be a big discussion.